20 hours. That's how long I'd been on my feet. Or maybe it was 20 days. In the thick, soupy air of the Northwood High School gym, time had melted into a single, continuous loop of antiseptic, sweat, and smoke. The Oak Ridge Inferno, as some news anchor had dramatically dubbed it, didn't care about clocks. It was a living, breathing monster on the horizon, and its smoky breath was in everything. It coated your tongue, stung your eyes, and painted the sky in a permanent, apocalyptic orange. Rule 1 of a disaster. The first thing to burn is the rule book. Rule 2. Someone in an air-conditioned office 100 miles away will always try to hand you a new one, still shrink-wrapped. I pressed 2 fingers against the carotid artery of a firefighter whose face was so completely covered in soot he looked like a ghost in reverse. His name was Miller, according to the name tag on his turnout coat, which was scorched black at the cuffs. His pulse was thready, his breathing shallow, dehydration and heat exhaustion, the classic combo. "All right, Miller, you're getting the cocktail," I said, my voice raspy. I grabbed an IV bag from a dwindling pile on the folding table next to me. My clinic was a collection of scavenged gym mats, a dozen cots, and that one table, which was probably last used for a bake sale. Now, it held saline drips, gauze, burn cream, and the last of the good coffee, courtesy of a retired paramedic named Sal, who had shown up 8 hours ago with a thermos and the steady hands of a saint. "Doc," Sal grunted, holding Miller's arm still. "We're down to 3 bags of saline after this one." "Copy that," I said, sliding the catheter into a vein with a practiced ease I'd learned in the dust-choked fobs of Afghanistan. There, the enemy wore different clothes, but the heat and the exhaustion were old friends. Someone's going to have to make a run. The problem was, a run was a 60-mile round trip to the official county staging area. The brass had, in their infinite wisdom, set up the primary medical tent in the next county over, citing safety protocols. It made sense on a map. On the ground, it was a death sentence for anyone with a serious injury. Firefighters are a stubborn breed. They won't leave the line for a second-degree burn or a bit of smoke inhalation. They'll work until they drop, so I'd set up a drop zone for them. I hadn't planned it. I was on a 24-hour shift at Northwood County General when the first wave of injured came in. I saw the gap, the logistical black hole between the fire line and effective medical care. So, I did what the Army taught me to do. I filled it. I signed out a mass casualty field kit, 3 duffels of emergency supplies, and drove my beat-up Jeep straight toward the smoke. I didn't ask for permission. Forgiveness, as they say, is easier to get. Usually, my cell phone, plugged into a portable battery pack, buzzed angrily against the table. The caller ID read, Northwood Hospital, admin. Ah, hell had found my zip code. "This is Thorne," I answered, tucking the phone between my ear and shoulder as I taped down Miller's 4-line. "Dr. Thorne, this is Administrator Davies." The voice was slick with manufactured calm, the kind of tone a man uses right before he tells you your car is being repossessed. "I'm calling to inquire about your current whereabouts. You were scheduled to end your shift 3 hours ago. Little busy, Mr. Davies. There's a pretty big fire happening, in case you missed it on the news." "I'm well aware of the fire," he said, the condescension practically dripping through the phone. "I'm also aware that you have absconded with several $1,000s worth of hospital property and set up I'm quoting the sheriff's department here, unauthorized and unsanctioned medical station in an active evacuation zone. Absconded. What a word. He made me sound like a pirate. A very tired pirate with a specialization in fluid replacement. "I signed for the supplies, Davies, and it's a triage center, not a tiki bar. The firefighters need it." A sigh. The long, put-upon sigh of a man whose golf game has just been interrupted. "Doctor, you are a resident. You do not have the authority to make that call. You are operating outside the chain of command, and, more importantly, outside the hospital's liability coverage. You are a massive, massive risk." I looked around the gym. At the dozen men sleeping the sleep of the utterly spent. At Sal, quietly cleaning a burn on another firefighter's arm. At the orange glow outside the windows. Risk wasn't some abstract concept in a legal document out here. It was in the air, in the rasp of every breath. "These men are getting hurt, and the official help is too far away to be effective," I said, keeping my voice low and even. "I am providing essential care. Isn't that the whole point?" "The point, Dr. Thorne," he snapped, the plastic calm finally cracking, "is that you are endangering your career and this hospital's reputation. You are to cease your activities immediately, pack up our property, and return to the hospital. A disciplinary committee will be convened first thing in the morning. Am I clear? I looked at Miller. His eyelids fluttered. I felt for his pulse again. Already stronger. Clear. Yeah, Davies was perfectly clear. He was a creature of the system, a man who saw human beings as potential lawsuits. He was protecting his institution. I was protecting its patients. The two goals had apparently decided they were no longer on speaking terms. Perfectly, I said, and hung up the phone. Sal gave me a knowing look. Trouble? The kind that wears a tie, I said, stripping off my gloves. How are we on gauze? A young firefighter sitting on a nearby cot, his face pale under the soot, overheard the exchange. He looked no older than 20. You in trouble, Doc? Nothing I haven't been in before. I lied. My stomach was a cold knot of dread. He was right. My career, the one I'd worked my ass off for since leaving the service, was hanging by a thread. But then I looked at his face, at the raw determination mixed with fear, and the knot loosened. What was a career compared to a life? The committee could have my credentials. I had work to do. Don't you worry about her? Another, older firefighter grunted from his cot, not even opening his eyes. Docs like her are tough as nails. The desk jockeys'll get tired and go home eventually. I wished I shared his confidence. But as I moved to the next patient, a woman with a nasty gash on her forearm from a falling branch, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't leaving. They could fire me. They could come drag me away. But I wasn't leaving until the fire was out, or I was. Day 2 dawned without a Sunday. Just a bruised, smoky haze that promised more of the same. The fire had jumped the containment line on Serenity Ridge overnight, and the mood was grim. But news of our little Maz, H unit had spread through the radio chatter. They called it the Thorn Patch, a bit of gallows humor that stuck. More crews started showing up, not just with injuries, but with offerings. One crew brought a generator and a box of high-protein bars. Another brought a dozen cases of bottled water they'd liberated from a reporter's van. They also started bringing information. Winds are shifting east, one would tell me while I wrapped his wrist. Creeks running dry, they're having to truck in water, another would mention as I flushed his eyes. I was becoming more than a medic. I was a command post fueled by coffee and sheer bloody-mindedness. The de facto leader of my new fan club was Chief Evans of the Northwood Fire Department. He was a man carved from oak, with kind eyes and a handshake that could crush granite. He showed up mid-morning with 2 giant thermoses of coffee and a box of donuts that felt more valuable than gold. Saw you on my way up to the line yesterday, he said, his voice a low rumble. Figured you were either crazy or a godsend. Turns out you're a bit of both. Trying my best, Chief, I said, gratefully accepting a cup. I heard you had a chat with your hospital admin, he said, his eyes twinkling. Word travels fast when you hang up on a suit. Don't you worry about Davies. He's got the spine of a chocolate eclair. But he's not the only one you've poked. His warning came to fruition an hour later in the form of a county sheriff's vehicle kicking up a cloud of dust as it skidded to a halt outside the gym. Out stepped a man with a chest puffed out by authority and a mustache that seemed to disapprove of the entire world. Sheriff Miller. He marched into the gym like he was leading a raid, his eyes scanning the scene with undisguised contempt. He stopped in front of my table, his hands on his hips. All right, who's in charge of this situation? That would be me, I said, wiping my hands on a rag. Dr. Thorne, can I help you, Sheriff? You can start by packing up this circus, he said, gesturing around the room. This is a mandatory evacuation zone. Your presence here is a violation of County Ordinance 3B, Section 4. I blinked. I'm sorry, I must have missed that part of the Hippocratic Oath. The part that says, first, do no harm, unless it violates County Ordinance 3B. His mustache twitched. You think you're clever. What you are, miss, is a civilian obstruction. You are encouraging these men to ignore proper medical protocols. Proper protocol is a 30-mile drive with a sucking chest wound? I shot back, my voice rising. I've got men and women in here who would be out of commission, or worse if they had to rely on your proper protocol. I'm keeping them on the line, Sheriff. I thought you'd appreciate that. What I'd appreciate is compliance, he boomed. Several of the firefighters who had been resting were now sitting up, watching the exchange with cold eyes. I have the authority to remove you and impound your supplies, and I have the authority to declare you a public health risk if you try, I said, my heart hammering. I was bluffing, completely and utterly, but he didn't know that. Before he could respond, Chief Evans materialized at my side. He was a good 6 inches taller than the sheriff and twice as wide. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Sheriff," Evans said, his voice calm but laced with steel. "Dr. Thorne is here at my invitation. She's my guest. My men are her patients. You have a problem with that? You have a problem with me and every firefighter on that ridge? Now, are we going to have a problem?" Sheriff Miller looked from Evans's stony face to the 24 pairs of hostile eyes now glaring at him from around the gym. He was a man who understood force, and he was currently facing a small, soot-stained army. He huffed, his authority deflating like a cheap balloon. "Fine," he spat. "But if one of these heroes gets seriously hurt because of your field hospital, it's on your head. All of you." He turned on his heel and stormed out, leaving a trail of impotent fury behind him. The gym was silent for a moment, and then someone started a slow clap. Soon, the whole room joined in. I felt a flush of heat rise in my cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. "Told you we had your back, Doc," Evans said with a wink. The victory was short-lived. That afternoon, a sleek black sedan I recognized from the hospital parking lot pulled up. Out stepped Dr. Sterling, the senior attending physician from the ER. Sterling was a man who believed the medical hierarchy was as sacred as Holy Scripture, and he was at the top of it. He wore his pristine white coat like a suit of armor, and it looked utterly ridiculous against the smoky backdrop. He'd clearly been sent by Davies as a reinforcement. He strode in, a clipboard clutched in his hand, his nose wrinkled in distaste. "Thorne," he said, foregoing any greeting. "Davies sent me to assess this debacle." He proceeded to walk around my station, his critique a running monologue of condescension. "Improperly sterilized surfaces. Cross-contamination risk. Are you even tracking your disposables? This is battlefield medicine, Thorne. We are not in a war zone." "Feels a lot like one, Sterling," I muttered, applying a fresh dressing to a nasty burn on a young firefighter's arm. The kid flinched. Sterling scoffed. "Please, this is a public service operation, not a free-for-all. Your technique is sloppy. You're inviting infection." He leaned over my shoulder to inspect the burn. "You should be using a silver sulfadiazine cream, not that bacitracin garbage." "I'm using what I have," I said through gritted teeth. "And what I have is keeping these people functional. If you'd like to help, grab a cot. Otherwise, feel free to assess from a distance." That was the wrong thing to say. His eyes narrowed. "I am not here to assist in your malpractice. I am here to document it." Davies was right to be concerned. "You are a liability. When I file my report with the medical board, your residency will be the least of your worries. You'll be lucky if you get to keep your license." The young firefighter I was treating had heard enough. He looked up at Sterling, his eyes blazing with a protective fire of their own. "Hey, you want to talk about sloppy? Your attitude is sloppy. Doc Thorne's been a damn angel to us. So why don't you take your clipboard and your shiny shoes and get lost before you're the one who needs a doctor?" Sterling froze, his mouth agape. To be spoken to like that, by a patient, was an offense of the highest order in his world. He shot me a look of pure venom, as if I had orchestrated the entire thing. He straightened his white coat, turned without another word, and marched back to his air-conditioned car. As he drove away, I felt a grim satisfaction. I had won the battle, but Sterling's threat hung in the air, thick as the smoke outside. He wasn't just a bureaucrat like Davies, or a rule follower like Miller. He was a doctor. His word, his report to the board, carried weight. He could destroy me from the inside, and I had a terrible feeling he was going to enjoy every second of it. The third day was a monster. The wind, which had been our reluctant ally, turned traitor. It shifted south, pushing the fire back over the ridge and down toward the old logging roads where several crews were trying to cut a new firebreak. The radio, which had been a steady stream of calm, professional chatter, became a cacophony of panicked voices. "Flash over on Hill 7. We've got a crew trapped. Mayday, mayday. Engine 5 is compromised. We have a burnover." The word sent a blade of ice through the hot, smoky air of the gym. A burnover was the stuff of nightmares. It's when the fire moves so fast it engulfs a vehicle, a position, an entire crew. Survival is a matter of luck and miracles. The relative calm of my station shattered. Every firefighter who could stand was on their feet, their faces etched with dread, listening to the desperate calls from their brothers and sisters on the line. Sal and I began preparing for the inevitable, laying out every remaining dressing, every IV bag, every tool we had. My hands moved on autopilot, but my mind was a maelstrom of worst-case scenarios. An agonizing 30 minutes later, the first of the rescue vehicles came screaming up to the gym. The back doors flew open, and the grim reality of the Mayday call spilled out. They were battered, burned, and choking. We went to work, a whirlwind of controlled chaos. Sal, myself, and a half-dozen firefighters with basic first aid training became an assembly line of life-saving. We cut away smoldering clothes, irrigated burns, administered oxygen, and started IVs. Then, the last truck arrived, and in the back was Pops. Everyone knew Pops. His real name was Mike, but no one used it. He was a 60-year-old veteran of the department, a man who was supposed to retire next year. He had the kind of gentle, crinkly-eyed smile that made you feel like everything was going to be okay. Right now, his face was a mask of pain and soot, his breathing a terrifying, wet gurgle. Chief Evans was right behind him, his own face a study in anguish. "Eris, it's bad." He was shielding one of the rookies when the flashover hit. I didn't need him to tell me, I could see it. The deep, angry burns across his back and shoulders were bad enough, but it was his breathing that scared me. His chest was rising and falling unevenly, and the skin around his neck was tight. A telltale sign of a tension pneumothorax, a collapsed lung. Air was leaking into his chest cavity, compressing his heart and his good lung. He was drowning on the inside. He had minutes. "He won't make it to the staging area," I said, my voice flat and absolute. "He won't even make it onto a helicopter." Evans's eyes locked with mine. "What can you do?" "I need to decompress his chest. I need to put in a tube. Right now." It was a line. A massive, career-ending, go-to-jail kind of line. Performing a field thoracostomy was an invasive surgical procedure. In a hospital, under the supervision of an attending, it was standard for this kind of trauma. In a high school gym, with a residence license, it was assault with a deadly scalpel, legally speaking. "Do it," Evans said, his voice unwavering. There was no time to argue. I yelled at Sal to get the field surgical kit. As I laid out the scalpel, the hemostat, and the chest tube, I could feel a new kind of chaos erupting at the gym entrance. The cavalry had arrived. The worst possible cavalry at the worst possible time. Sheriff Miller was there, drawn by the Mayday call. And right behind him was Dr. Sterling, who must have been lurking nearby, just waiting for a chance to prove his point. A volunteer, seeing the official-looking car, had also called the hospital, and I could hear the tinny, panicked voice of Administrator Davies squawking from the volunteer's cell phone. They had all converged on my moment of truth. "What in God's name is going on here?" Miller bellowed, trying to push his way through the crowd of firefighters. Sterling saw the surgical kit in my hands, and his face went white with a mixture of horror and vindictive glee. "Thorne, stop! You are not qualified to do that. You will kill him. She's performing surgery outside of a licensed facility." Davies's voice shrieked from the phone. "Somebody stop her! This is a multi-million-dollar lawsuit!" I ignored them, my focus narrowing to a tiny patch of skin on Pops's chest. I found my landmark, the space between his ribs. I had my scalpel poised. "I'm warning you, Doctor," Sterling yelled, lunging forward. "I will physically prevent you from committing this act of gross malpractice." "That's it," Sheriff Miller shouted, reaching for my arm. "You're done. You're interfering with—" He never finished the sentence, because in that instant a wall formed, a solid, immovable wall of yellow turnout gear. Chief Evans stepped directly in front of Sterling, his hand coming up to press firmly against the doctor's pristine white coat. A dozen other firefighters, grim-faced and silent, filled the space around me, creating a protective circle. They turned their backs on me and faced the intruders. "Get out of her way," Evans said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He wasn't asking. Sterling sputtered. "This is insane. I am the senior medical authority here." "You're nothing here," another firefighter snarled. "She's our doctor. He's our family. You want to stop her? You're going to have to go through all of us." Sheriff Miller looked at the line of soot-stained, exhausted, and utterly determined faces. He saw men who had just walked through hell and would gladly do it again to protect one of their own. For the first time, he seemed to understand that his badge and his rulebook meant absolutely nothing in this room. He hesitated. That was all I needed. I blocked out the noise. The shouting, the frantic squawking from the phone, it all faded into a dull roar. There was only my breathing, the feel of the scalpel in my hand, and the man on the cot in front of me. I made the incision, clean and precise. I inserted the hemostat, pushed through the muscle, and felt the distinctive pop as I entered the pleural space. Then came the sound. A soft, desperate hiss. The sound of trapped air escaping, of a lung reinflating, of pressure being released from a dying heart. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I fed the chest tube into the opening and secured it. I watched Pops's chest. It was rising and falling evenly now, His frantic, gurgling breaths eased into a slower, deeper rhythm. I felt for his pulse. It was stronger, steadier. He was going to live. I looked up, my hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline. The gym was dead silent. Sterling was staring at me, his face a mask of disbelief and utter defeat. Miller had taken a step back, his bluster completely gone. From the phone, there was only static. I had crossed the line. I had broken every rule in the book, and I had just saved a man's life. In the aftermath of a fire, the world is eerily quiet. The roar is gone, replaced by the hiss of cooling embers and the drip of water from fire hoses. The chaos in the gym receded with the flames. Pops was stabilized and airlifted to a major burn center in the city, the chopper blades whipping up a vortex of ash as it lifted off. The doctors on the other end of the radio, after hearing my report, had one thing to say: "Good work, you saved his life." The adrenaline left my body in a rush, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and the cold certainty of my own professional demise. The firefighters, one by one, came up to me. They didn't say much. A hand on my shoulder, a gruff, "Thank you, Doc." A look in their eyes that said more than words ever could. They saw what I did, but the system wouldn't. The official notice came via email the next morning. It was from Davies, of course, CCing half the hospital's legal department. I was placed on indefinite administrative leave, pending a full investigation into my unprofessional conduct and violation of hospital protocols. I was suspended. It was the sterile corporate equivalent of being kicked in the teeth. I read it, closed my laptop, and went to sleep for 14 hours. But while I was sleeping, the story was catching fire. Not the wildfire, but a media firestorm. One of the younger firefighters, the one who had told Dr. Sterling to get lost, had a cousin who was a reporter for a state paper. He'd given her the whole story, from the first phone call with Davies to the standoff in the gym. The headline was explosive. Rogue resident doctor saves fire crew while officials tried to stop her. My face was on the news. My name was trending on social media. The narrative was simple, powerful, and overwhelmingly in my favor. I was the lone doctor who cared more about people than paperwork. Davies, Sterling, and Sheriff Miller were cast as the villains, bumbling, heartless bureaucrats who would have let a hero die to avoid a lawsuit. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was close enough. The blowback was immediate and immense. The hospital's PR department went into full meltdown. Davies and Sterling were forced to hold a press conference. I watched it from the greasy booth of a local diner, nursing a cup of coffee. Davies, sweating under the camera lights, praised my unconventional bravery and commitment to patient care. Sterling, looking like he'd swallowed a lemon, mumbled about the complexities of field medicine and how his only concern was Dr. Thorne's safety and the patient's long-term outcome. The hypocrisy was so thick you could have cut it with a butter knife. They were trying to rewrite history, to paint themselves as concerned supervisors, not as the men who actively tried to stop a life-saving procedure. The door to the diner jingled, and Chief Evans slid into the booth opposite me. He looked tired, but he had a small smile on his face. "Seen the news?" he asked, nodding at the TV. "Hard to miss," I said. "They're making me sound like a saint, and them like concerned fathers." He snorted. "Don't you worry about them. They're choking on their own words. The Firefighters Union issued a statement this morning, called you a hero. They also mentioned, very politely, that if the hospital takes any adverse action against your career, every firefighter in the state will find a new hospital for their health plan." Amazing how fast that gets their attention. I stared into my coffee cup, a strange mix of gratitude and bitterness swirling inside me. It shouldn't take a threat to make them do the right thing. "No, it shouldn't," Evans agreed, his smile fading. "The system's not built for people, Eris. It's built to protect itself. Sometimes it takes a good person to break it to remind everyone what's important." He slid a folded newspaper across the table. It was an interview with Pops's family. His wife called me their guardian angel. His son said he couldn't wait to shake my hand. "That's what's important," Evans said softly. "The rest is just noise." We sat there in silence for a while, the diner's quiet hum, a welcome change from the sirens and shouting of the past few days. For the first time since I'd hung up on Davies, the cold knot of dread in my stomach finally, truly, began to dissolve. The fight wasn't over, but I wasn't fighting it alone anymore. 2 months later, I was officially a doctor again. The hospital's full investigation concluded with a quiet, face-saving verdict. The board, cornered by a PR nightmare and the very real threat of losing the Firefighters Union contract, reinstated me. They issued a formal reprimand for failure to adhere to established protocols, a piece of paper that went straight into my file and that everyone, including the administrator who signed it, knew was utterly meaningless. I was back in the ER, stitching up drunks and diagnosing the flu, as if nothing had ever happened. Then came the invitation. It was a simple flyer for a "Thank you BBQ" at the Northwood Fire Station. I figured it was their way of closing the chapter, a chance for me to get a free burger and a few handshakes before we all moved on. When I pulled up to the station, I realized I'd underestimated the event. It wasn't just a few crews. It seemed like the entire county was there. Families, kids, local officials, even Sheriff Miller was there. Looking sheepish and keeping a wide berth, Chief Evans met me with a bear hug. "Glad you could make it, Doc." He led me through the crowd, through a sea of grateful smiles and handshakes. I finally saw Pops, standing by the grill, laughing with his family. He had some scarring on his arms, but his eyes were bright, that same crinkly smile back in place. He wrapped me in a careful hug. "Heard I owe you one," he whispered in my ear. "Just doing my job," I whispered back, my throat suddenly tight. After a while, Chief Evans climbed onto the flatbed of an old fire engine, a microphone in his hand. The crowd quieted down. "We're here today to say thank you," he began, his voice booming across the lot. "To say thank you to a community that supported us, and to say thank you to one person in particular." He looked right at me. "When the fire was at its worst, we learned something. The system, the rules, the protocols. They're there to protect institutions. They're not always there to protect people. When it mattered most, it wasn't a system that saved one of our own. It was a person. A person who was brave enough to care more about a life than a rulebook." He paused, and a couple of his guys walked over to a massive object covered by a huge blue tarp. "This department just received a grant for a new heavy rescue truck. The best of the best. It's going to be the rig that goes out on the worst calls. The one that carries the tools to save lives when things look impossible. And it's customary to give a new engine a name. We think we found the perfect one." With a flourish, they pulled the tarp away. There sat a gleaming, brand-new rescue truck, polished to a mirror shine, and painted on the side of the cab door, in bold gold lettering underscored by a caduceus, were two words: Doc Thorne. The crowd erupted in applause, but I barely heard it. I just stared at the truck, at my name. All my life, especially in the Army, I'd been cynical about medals, about official commendations. They were just pieces of metal and paper handed out by the very system you had to fight against to get the job done. But this was different. This wasn't a medal from a bureaucrat. This was a monument from the people on the front lines. This was respect, forged in fire and smoke. They say you're supposed to fight the system. Sometimes you just have to ignore it, do the right thing, and let the people you fight for build a monument to prove you were right.